Hey folks, Nerdy Pastor back for a short video that's kind of a standalone video that just wanted to chat with you about how to read theology books. There's a ton of videos, or actually really good videos out there on reading for quantity or reading quickly or just reading lots of kinds of books and kind of with the goal of getting this many books done quantity-wise or reading for excellence or whatever it is. And I think a lot of those videos are actually pretty good. I've watched quite a few of them, and there's a lot to pick up on them, and would recommend that you watch a lot of those as well to kind of supplement if you're watching this video. But this video is going to talk more about why reading theology books, not just reading in general, but theology books or books for Christian living or books for Christian practice and ethics. And so it's going to have a little bit of a different slant on it than those other books that are just trying to get you to read volumes and volumes or getting you to read just better per se, though there are good things to pick up on that too. But I thought I would just kind of ask 3 questions or 4 questions in the video and kind of steer you in how I have learned to discipline myself to read and the ways I've tried and failed and the ways I've tried and failed and the ways I've continued to try and continue to fail in doing the things that I hope to do with my reading goals and habits. So just wanted to ask 4 questions and kind of give you my answer, and hopefully you'll ponder those questions with me and think for yourself about why you would go about theology books as an endeavor for your time and your purpose in your life. So first question I would ask is, why do you want to read? I think a lot of times we read because we feel like it's a virtuous thing to do. And I think in some respects it is. But a lot of us have these kind of goals and attainments and things that we kind of have inside of us, and we don't really think about or meditate on, why am I even reading in the first place? Sometimes people think more thoroughly on why they don't want to read, right? But if you come to a place where you're saying, I do want to read, think through your motivations of why you want to read. And as you want to read theology books as a Christian, what are you really doing it for? We think of what it says in Corinthians and in other places that, whether we eat or we drink, we all do it for the glory of God. I think ultimately we want to aspire to read to glorify God, to better and further our own sanctification and our growth as a believer, and to take those commands to renew our minds seriously, to grow in grace and knowledge seriously. But I also think it's important to remember that the Lord has not simply given us images to grow. I think images are a big part of it, signs and seals and baptism and the Lord's Supper, and the earth itself in a very, very, very general sense is a sacrament in a sense because it's a visual emanation of God's very presence, though it's not the same thing as God. That's a pantheistic idea that many people get trapped into. But God is not distant. We don't believe in a deistic kind of agnostic sense of God. He's very much involved with his creation and in many ways rests in it and is immanent in it. He's nearer than we think he is, actually. So there's not this kind of pejorative thinking of images and signs and seals and symbols. Those are good things in a Christian sense. There's a place for them. We don't want to elevate them, but we also don't want to divorce them, okay? But thinking through that, having that said, God mainly communicates to us through a word. So because the Logos, the second person of the Trinity, John talks about in chapter 1 of his Gospel, Maximus the Confessor says that all human creatures are little logi, little words in a sense. They're supposed to be mirrors of the mirror himself. God the Son, who is the image bearer, the perfect image bearer, Hebrews 1 talks to us about, Colossians 1 speaks about. There's something to a word. There's something to communication. There's something to the idea spoken in spoken form and then written down and inscripturated. Something very Christian about that. So I think there is something that is very enriching to a Christian pursuit of holiness and sanctification and connecting the truth to the world by reading. I really do. So just think through, why do you want to read? Is it a motivation just to kind of puff yourself up with knowledge, or is it really to pursue the glory of God, your own sanctification, and to understand that it's one of the primary ways it seems like God communicates with us? It's a way to imitate the Lord in a lot of ways. The second question I would ask is, how should you read? Well, let me share with you just for a moment basically the failures, some of the failures of mine is I've been motivated, how to read a lot of times just to get things accomplished, just to check things off the list, just to do more, right? Kind of the non-Christian goal of just when is enough. It's never enough. Just do more, pile more on. That's a challenging sin I've had to try to overcome by God's grace in my life and still fight quite a lot against personally. But the reality is, how should you read? I really think the answer is create a rhythm that works in your life, okay? There are people that you want to imitate that are great readers and great thinkers and maybe mentors or pastors or teachers that you want to emulate, and I think that's good. But what is your rhythm? Create a rhythm for yourself that is consistent, but also in some sense natural. It's like starting a diet. If you just pivot 90 degrees, that might work for a week, but it's not a lasting change. I think a gradual change and slowly integration into a new pattern, of life is good, or slowly integrating something into your life and creating a new pattern of living is probably the best way to gain, I think, a good rhythm of reading in your life. So try not to do a crash reading diet, okay? Try not to say, I'm going to read this 1,200-page book, or the person that starts in January 1st saying, I'm going to read the whole Bible. They've not, even read one book of the Bible in a long, long time. But they just want to read the whole book of the Bible, and they set out on the fateful journey that leads to Leviticus, and they die in the valley of humiliation. So unfortunately, don't do that. If you want to avoid failure and discouragement, find a good, rhythm of life and integrate reading into that rhythm of life. There should be something unnatural about it. You're adding something to. You're going to subtract something as you add something. But try not to do sudden crash diets of reading, and try not to jump into huge volumes of books or something like that. Start with a 150, 200-page book and start there, okay? And then the other question is, what kind of books should I read? That kind of pivots off that one. That second question of how should I read, but what kind of books to read, is read books you like. I don't know what to tell you, but there are great books to read, classic books, important books in every sense of the word, important Christian classics that people should read. But I would tell you, start with what you like. Start with things that really interest you. Not all books are created equal, though, so try to find books that pastors and elders and other mentors and people that read a lot would suggest. Start there, but try to find books that you like. Read books that you're interested in. Don't try to pick up something that you just really would never ever touch, and then you're like trying to fight your way through it. Find books that you'd like. So find a good rhythm, establish a rhythm that's natural, that adds something, and you start to give other things away and make margin for your time. But also find books and genres of Christian literature that you're interested in reading in, okay? The third question is, when should I read? This is the hardest one for me. I've had the most failures in my life with this. I really started reading aggressively and intentionally in 11th grade. And it wasn't Christian theology books as much at the time, though I did read a lot of devotional Christian books at the time. It was actually a lot of nonfiction and a lot of military history books. I was very interested in becoming a history professor in high school and early college. Then the dream died when I couldn't afford college except for to continue my music pursuits, and I got almost a full scholarship for music actually in college. So I did that, and God honored those efforts and gave me almost a debt-free experience in college. But I really wanted to be a history professor, and part of me still kind of does. But I started to really read voraciously and aggressively and consistently in 11th grade, and I hadn't read like almost anything up to that point. But it opened up a new vista, a whole new world for me when I started to read nonfiction. I've always loved nonfiction. I don't dislike fiction. I actually really do enjoy fiction, but I've always, as you can tell, I've really pursued nonfiction and more research kind of books in my life mostly. But it started there. And I will tell you this, I remember talking to my father and saying, Dad, I really wanted to read the Bible consistently. When's a good time? And he says, Ross, there's never a good time. You're going to have to make time. And he says, but why don't you start reading on the way to school? Because he would drive me to school. So I'd open up, I'd read Ephesians between the time we left and the time we got there. And it just started to say, oh, I need to create a habit and a pattern, but it needs to be at a certain time. And the more the older I've gotten, the more responsibility you tend to get when you get older, with children, with your spouse, with the mortgage, with the bills, with your job, all these other things. And I've tried all sorts of things where I try to read late at night. I'd read for a couple hours at night. I try to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning. I've done that before. I've tried to read on my lunch breaks and my breaks during work. I try to set aside an hour before work. I get to work, so I'm ready to work, but I read for an hour. I've tried every sort of thing in the world. This is what works for me. I'm not saying that you need to do it. But I recognize more and more that there is only 24 hours in a day. You're limited in how much time you have. The consistency of what you do is more important than the how much, okay? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, what's your day look like? Just think about your day. And if you're getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning, you get to work at 7, you get home at 4, get home at 6, you got this stuff to do, just sit down, think through your day, think how you really use those 24 hours on an average basis. Like, what's the norm that you do? And then find what the best time would be to read. It has to be intentional. It really does. So what's eventually worked for me is, instead of trying to craft times I really wouldn't read and make those times reading times, I basically have said, these 3 times during the day are the most opportune times for me to read. So guess what? This is what I've done. I will take a pile of books, I will sit those books in the areas that I spend, and I will simply say, when it's time for intentional reading, I'm going to pull a book from there. I'm going to read that book. And to be honest, I'm reading 20 books at a time. I'm not reading right through one. I'm reading a lot of books and chunks of books at a time. I'm almost never reading just, start to finish one book. I'm reading like 5 or 6 books intentionally, casually, like 10 or 15 more, and I'm just kind of doing them as I go. In the mornings, I've got books in my office. I pull books from there. I try not to transport books around a whole lot because I'll lose them. So I just keep them in one shelf in my home office. I've got tons of books, as you can see in my office here. I do that. And then I will travel. There'll be a book in my car. There'll be a book, coming and going on trips. There'll be 2 or 3 books on my hands during that I will peruse through as well. But what I've noticed works well for me is I know where I'm going to be. And I know when I'm intentionally going to spend time, and I know when I'm casually going to spend time. So that's the difference, is that I know when I have intentional time to read, and I know when it's going to be a casual time to read. And I don't try to force intentional time into casual time. That was always my problem reading, is that I always would try to make this intentional time in more of a casual moment, and I wasn't focused, and it would wear me out. Or I would try to read a whole book in a short period of time, and I just didn't have the margin to do that. So what's really worked well for me is creating intentional times, casual times, know where I'm going to be during the day, and just have books at my disposal that I'm interested in, that I want to read, and that I'm motivated for, and I've read a whole lot that way. So when to read, you need to look at your schedule, you need to see really where you're going to be most of the time, and you need to find intentional and casual times to read, because if you're trying to make intentional times in those casual times, you will struggle. And if every time is just casual, you're never going to really get anything done, okay? So just kind of find where that is. When I'm at home with my family, that is not an intentional time to read a lot of times. When everyone's asleep, sure, I can read at 10:30 at night and read a book. I can get up early in the morning and read a book. I can do something in the middle of my day and read a book, but I can't do it when it's time to spend time with the kids. I can casually read though, right? But I can't intentionally read during that time. So find that. And then lastly, the question, I want to cap this video off at 15 or 16 minutes, is set some goals for yourself. You don't need to start with this massive goal, but as you start to get these habits and these rhythms and these intentional and casual times kind of worked out, establish some goals for yourself. What I've also found to be very helpful is when you establish goals for yourself of reading, do it with other people. I have 3 reading groups, and these are not, one of them is associated with people that I work with and work for at my church, but most of them are just people. My sister's in one. I have a lot of friends in another one that I do virtually. I'm doing one right now with a seminary that's reading the whole City of God this coming year. Establish goals for yourself, but find people that do it together with. That's the thing, is that when you find goals for yourself, find other people that have similar intentions. Find other people that want to read like that. Find people that want to pursue a life of reading like that. And you're going to find a lot of encouragement. We don't tend to lose a lot of interest in the people that are in the reading groups just because we choose this book over this. As long as it's kind of broadly within theology, most of the time those people just stick around to keep reading, because people that want to read and grow, doesn't really matter what book. It's as long as it's in kind of the right lane in general, we want to read, right? and we're encouraged by one another. So, goals for yourself is, once you've started to create these habits and these rhythms and these intentional and casual spaces for yourself, like, okay, this is how I read, this is when I read, this is when the time I have, and you start to finally figure those things out, then set some goals. So don't do the goals at the start, okay? Don't do the goals at the start. Do the goals after you've done it for a little while, so you start to see what's reasonable, and then start to set goals for yourself of, I'd really like to read this book that's this many pages at some point, and can I do it myself, or do I need someone to partner with, or do I need a group to do that, and seek that out. I've read chunks of the City of God in my life. I've read chunks of big theology books in my life, but sometimes I want to read the whole thing, every little detail. So find people that'll do that with, and that's the fun part, is once you find those goals that are fitting the rhythms and the intentionality and the casual reading times and the habits, then you start to achieve them. And then when you find other people, it becomes so much more joyful, and it's more memorable. You remember what you read much better, and it's just exciting. I think reading theology is so exciting, and fun, and rich, and humbling, and there's so much humility involved as you read these great thinkers, as you read not just the scripture, of course, but the voices of the church that the scriptures inhabit and move and grace as well. And as you do that, you're like, this is so humbling in many ways, and so liberating in many ways. It's a wonderful thing to read great Christian books, and then to also achieve some of those goals with other people. So I hope that encourages you a little bit. Why read, how to read, when to read, and then some goals that you set for yourself. Remember, the goals come at the end. Don't do them at the beginning. Don't set goals that are just not real or natural with your schedule, your habits already. Start to set those goals after you've built habits, after you've built spaces for yourself to read, after you've built a rhythm for yourself. Then start to set goals, then start to kind of branch out and find others that are like-minded, that want to read the same things, to also help, to kind of come alongside. Not just that, you want to read by yourself still too, but have those other kind of sojourners, co-journers in a way, come alongside you to read books as well. It's extremely encouraging, and I think it's a lot of fun. So I hope that helps. Signing off.